Hello everyone and welcome to another QUALITEST webinar. My name is Sarah Taylor and I'm your host. We're delighted to have our partner TRICENTIS guest presenting with us today, and before we start please take a moment to check your audio visual settings while I run through a few items about how you can take part in today's event. Today's webinar is being recorded and you will receive a copy of this recording within a few days of transmission. This session will last approximately 1 hour and includes a Q&A session. If you have any questions, you can submit them the usual way by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. The control panel is situated on the right-hand side of your screen. We will collect your questions and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, let's meet the presenters, Leandro Melendez from QUALITEST, and a very warm welcome to Wesley Leffel from TRICENTIS. I'll now hand over to the presenters who will tell you a bit more about themselves. So Leandro, Wes, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Hello everybody and welcome to this presentation. And as Sarah mentioned, first with some introduction, I am Leandro Melendez, a performance testing manager here at QUALITEST. And adding up a little bit more details, I help to deliver multiple performance optimization, testing, analysis, projects and services to diverse customers. I am frequently a public speaker, doing presentations on many diverse topics like the ones you see here. I also have an acronym, or also known as Señor Performo in the internets, where I produce diverse content in terms of performance testing, guidelines, webinars, and other videos. And as well here with QUALITEST, we have the video series Performance and Beyond, where we explain diverse IT topics. I think that is from me. Wes, what about you?
Yeah, I'm glad to be here today. So my name's Wes Leffel. I'm a senior product manager with TRICENTIS. And I think beyond that, my background is all things SAP. So I'm coming up on 14 or 15 years of SAP delivery experience, primarily as a solution and enterprise architect. I joined TRICENTIS about a year ago, and I'm excited to talk about quality assurance, testing, performance testing, and everything related to those topics today. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Wes, also for coming up with us. But moving on and taking a moment to talk a little bit about QUALITEST. We are the world's leading AI-powered quality engineering company. We're integrating AI into all the QA practices that you can think of, helping also on orchestration and implementing all the items and activities pertinent to QA in the landscape of your solutions, your companies, your organizations. We have been for the past six years, QUALITEST was named a visionary QA and testing services companies in that Magic Quadrant that we all know from the Gartner guys. Those were little details about QUALITEST. Now let's hear a little bit about our friends.
Yeah, thanks, Leandro. And I think what's cool about both of us is we are both sort of quadrant leading, right? We can see down in the bottom right that TRICENTIS is definitely leading in terms of both the Gartner and Forrester Magic Quadrants, right? Founded in 2007, it's been pretty rapid growth from there. I think, the most recent big news is in 2020 we launched the SAP Solex partnership. So we're now, standard offering with SAP, which is very cool. We have inbuilt solutions with Solution Manager as well as integrations throughout the landscape. The partner network is growing rapidly. We're excited to be here with QUALITEST today. Yeah, I think that's about it,
Excellent. Okay. Well, everybody, now it's enough time for introductions and talking about ourselves, but now let's start talking about this topic that we will be getting into today. It will be divided in four parts. We will start talking a little bit around SAP in general, Then we will dive a little bit on details about QE for SAP. Then we will give some projections into the future of SAP, what's coming, or what has just come, but we will get into that in a bit. And in the end, we will close with deeper recommendations so that you can improve your QA efforts on SAP. So without much, let's begin. SAP, Wes, why don't you tell us a little bit about
Yeah, for sure.
where can an organization be on SAP?
Yeah, so I think, at TRICENTIS, we typically see customers in what we sort of describe as these three buckets, right? People getting fit, people getting ready, and people making the move, right? So it is within the SAP community, no surprise, or it is well known that ECC has an end-of-life date, out in the future. It essentially has an end of life. And so what that means is the majority of the folks and the majority of the customers, I think somewhere around 50% or maybe upper 47% are still on or have ECC systems, right? And so we typically get involved with customers in sort of one of these three buckets. First, they're what we call keeping fit, which is they're really just looking to simplify the existing landscapes, right? They have ECC systems, maybe they already have an S4HANA system, but essentially the mantra of keeping fit is, reducing cost, reducing complexity on your existing systems. It is not some big transformation, et cetera, right? And quality assurance and test automation really can play a role both in helping to keep fit as well as transitioning into the next one, which is getting ready, right? So it should be no surprise that these large greenfield and brownfield SAP implementations that we're talking about when customers transition from ECC to S4, it's not uncommon to spend 6-8 months, a year, upwards of a year and a half planning and preparing for these projects, right? And so that's this whole getting ready phase. Someone has committed, they're going to do it, and now they're really just looking to figure out who the SIs are going to be, what data do we want to keep, et cetera. And quality assurance and test automation fits within that realm as well. It is possible to create reusable assets before or during the project that really both accelerate the project as well as, empower the second phase of it. And then the final sort of bucket is what we call making the move, right? This is they are active in an S4 transformation or some big transformation project. And what we find is that, the TRICENTIS tool set or platform can really increase the individual capabilities of your project team members. And it's a great place to bring, the automation and the quality assurance aspect in, right? It's better to do it during the project than push it all the way to the end, end up with a big delay in your project and then not have anything for your secondary phases or your stabilization phase. Moving on. So when we talk about application landscape, right, what do you have? You guys all know you have huge amounts of tech infrastructure, right? All sorts of business applications. These could be commercial off-the-shelf applications. These could be the SAPs, the Oracles, the JD Edwards, the Workdays, the ServiceNows, whatever, right? A lot of those applications now have what are described as industry-specific modules. So this could be for automotive, high-tech, telco, healthcare, pharmaceutical, et cetera, right? You then have or are in the process of moving to the cloud. So what we find is most people are in the cloud, but not fully in the cloud. So again, that is a transformation journey in and of itself, right? So you're going to have single cloud, multi-cloud, all sorts of SaaS offerings, everything else, and what you end up with in that landscape between all three of those previous bullet points is sort of a massive integration layer, right? And we like to see companies spend a lot of time and really get that integration layer right. Next slide.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Wes, it is pretty diverse, extensive, and organizations can be in multiple positions, stages of, let's call it, kind of the SAP lifecycle, where there are even more complexities. You have interfaces, the ways that you can access and touch SAP, which at the very beginning used to be only the GUI, or I have heard it being referenced by naming it many names, but GUI is the one that most frequently I hear it, the usual terminal-like platform where you can access it and work with it. But in, I was going to say in these modern days, but it has been already several years that it has been worked out on different platforms that you can access or interface with SAP, and that you can interact with it. There are many, web, portal, CRM, but some that get the most attention lately is Fiori, which enables not only a web platform for you to be able to interact with SAP from anywhere that you have a browser, but as well from any device, any platform that can trigger or display the Fiori platform. It's pretty universal and brings up lots of new activities, challenges, also capabilities. As I said, you can open it from diverse environments. I have seen it even being opened from a fridge, where you can also kind of use the interface to order some more milk automatically. But the capabilities and possibilities are impressive and extensive. In the same way, it is the QA layer that you should be paying attention to with all these new SAP interfaces and capabilities. And not only that, not only the web, we have other ways to interface and work with the platform. You can do it through the service, different types of service layers that you can make SAP talk with other applications, and vice versa, these other applications to talk with SAP and interact through the service layer, which as well has been evolving, has multiple different shapes, forms, names, and ways to do it, and that you can work with other platforms. So all of these elements can help you to put together or interact with SAP, and gives you what we want to make you conscious here. There are so many areas or front ends or fronts, literally front ends, that you can play with or that you have to pay attention to. So moving a little bit as well, not only in the ways that you can interact with it, they are growing, they are getting diverse, they are getting more complex every day, but as well the SAP ecosystem is pretty large, pretty wide. On one hand, you have all the components that you can integrate with SAP nowadays, as I was mentioning earlier, that you can have layers that work, that let other applications and other software interact with SAP. You have all these components that will allow you to integrate it in a huge, incredibly complex ecosystem if you need it. Whatever you may need SAP to talk to or connect to, most probably you can. So this is another element to keep in mind. And on the other hand, it has also interactions from these enablements that SAP gets. Means that you can make it interact with not only applications per se, but entities. You can make it interact with the cloud, you can make it interact with other partners, with authorities, with private organizations, social networks, mobile apps. So the interconnectivity here is starting to open up the floodgates, to call it in a way, on all the possibilities that you can play, implement, or work with SAP. And all this brings lots of challenges around SAP, isn't it, Wes?
Yeah. Yeah, I think when we talk about challenges, the implementation itself is sort of the first major hurdle, right? Both planning, preparing, as well as executing, and then supporting post go live. As you mentioned, right? Your SAP system is not going to be standalone. It's going to have sort of service-based connections for things like Jira and ServiceNow, right? For monitoring and health checks, etc. It's also going to have integrations with your on-premise apps, and if you are, for example, an oil and gas company, potentially to public regulatory and government agencies, right? Most SAP systems have integrations with banking institutions for, accounts receivable, accounts payable type activities, right? There's a proliferation of mobile apps in there as well, as well as all of your business partners, right? The majority of the business partner interactions are all integrated these days as well. And so, there's a lot to scope, there's a lot to deal with, right? And so I think that in and of itself is the first challenge. And I think you then layer on top of that customization, right? Which is, challenges unique to your business or the way that you like to do things or things that your business partners require you to do, right? So not only do you have a extremely complex integrated landscape in the cloud with SaaS offerings and on-prem, right? You also have this sort of range of customization possibility that is both required by you but also required of you, right? And so again, that really sets the framework for needing a strong QA space. Leandro?
Of course, yeah, and from what you were saying, all these customizations, all the way that you can do the implementations and the variations in which SAP can take, it can mutate into a completely different beast from one organization to the other. To give a quick story, and on one organization, the customer requested us like, hey, don't you know how to use SAP? And the answer was like, yeah, we know it pretty well, but it depends on every organization. Each one needs a different customization. Each one will process an invoice, a purchase order differently for different reasons. One may be selling cereal, the other one might be selling space equipment, and everyone has its own little perks and details that make it even more important that you assure that the quality stays in place on all of these little elements that you have around SAP. Quality assurance is incredibly important because many of these components, SAP is a huge element, a huge system solution. It's a beast, as I was saying, and it has so many components that it's pretty sturdy. It's pretty good, but you can change so much on it, and the things that could deviate from what is your original plan, you gotta be careful around it. So let's dive into it. Some of those quality elements, some of the things that you can do to get some quality enablement on your SAP implementations. How can you start to integrate it? So why is it key for SAP? And we have been giving some insights on all the components, all the details, why you need to be careful with those three phases that was just mentioned, that you need to guarantee that you mitigate those risks, which are, as an example, on an implementation, where you're working through getting it right, where you're working in getting it there, getting it in place. You need to make sure that things are flowing, that they are interconnecting, that they are integrating well, and it will be different. And this is some of the new things. I was saying that SAP has quote-unquote new things that has not been that new, but an element that I think it's coming lately in the last maybe 3 years, strongly coming, is the cloud enablement, where you are you don't have to have everything on your premises. You can send SAP into the cloud through many different modes. We will talk a little bit about them in a moment, that you gotta be careful with those complexities as well. The other one is the customizations. When you are already there, when you are already working with SAP, or when you are starting to integrate it, you need to implement and enable quality in legacy elements, out of the box or vanilla components, as this customer that I mentioned earlier. Don't you know? Yeah, the out of the box, the standard elements, we are very good at it and we know how to deal with it. But there are some that are new requirements, some things that the other organization that we work with did not do it exactly the same. We want to think that your organization is doing things slightly different, better, or just as was mentioned, for legal reasons or the nature of your business. So you need to be careful with those. And as well, what we were mentioning, SAP integrates with lots of things. I would even say integrates with everything that you can think of. So you gotta be careful because you may have internal integrations there with your own systems, with your own satellite applications, modules, SAP and non-SAP. And you can have it integrating with third-party elements, with many other external banks, with government, with international entities. So all of these complexities make QE, QA key, incredibly important in all your SAP implementations. So now that we know it, it is incredibly important. I won't reiterate it. I don't want to sound like a broken record. So let's jump into one of the elements that we can do for starting enabling quality in our SAP systems. And the most traditional is manual testing, manual executions that are recommended to be done in the front end mostly, where you generally cannot automate some actions from the user. They are required to be managed, tracked, and reported because you have multiple people doing these manual executions where they will report and integrate all the results and have them, they can raise the facts, they can lift many elements. But the key component with manual is not only this paradigm that we so often hear that automations will leave manual testers without a job. There are things that only a human being can report well that should not be done by an automation. And things like usability. Is this button flowing? Is this working well? As a quick example, there was this application, this SAP implementation that originally worked on a desktop. The buttons and everything was migrated to be opened in a mobile, but the buttons were desktop-like, and the pointer is incredibly accurate, but our big, thick thumbs are not in a tiny screen. So that was something that no automation was catching. And as soon as a real user, a manual tester, started to try to work on it, we're like, hey, these buttons are not easy to work with. And easy to work with is not something that an automation can catch. So all of these can be worked out by a human being, should be worked by a human being, and the results need to be managed. Wes, I think you can talk a little bit more around where TRICENTIS can help us to manage.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would first just reiterate what you said, and I totally agree with it. You know, even though we are a test automation company, we fully acknowledge that not all testing can be automated, right? We cannot do without the human element. And so with that said, you need a tool that can assist you to help manage, track, and report on the manual testing, right? It's happening, it needs to be known, and a lot of times within these big SAP programs, right, or these big SAP implementations, you have very strict audit and compliance requirements, right? You actually have to generate for the auditors proof that you went and tested all these things, right? And so that's where a platform like QTest comes in, right? It's a spiritual successor of something like HPQC, where you can, you know, store and maintain your test cases and your scripting and your results and all of those things, right? And so, you know, this is really the first lens when we start to talk about managing the broader effort of testing, right, is still the need for this.
Yeah, it's a very useful platform to forward messages, manage, be aware, have some sort of dashboarding that management can take decisions, because yeah, you will have a bunch of human beings going through the tests and finding problems, bugs, things that need to be fixed, and you need something centralized so that everyone can go over it. Really, really important.
Exactly. And then you sort of layer in integrations with something like Jira, right, where you can, from your test script, you get a defect, you can feed the defect into Jira. From Jira, you can work the defect, right, and then flow back and forth. And so, like you said, it is very useful when trying to manage all this.
Yeah, lots of interconnectivity as well, as we were saying, with SAP itself. And well, not everything around quality enabling and quality assurance is manual testing. As we were mentioning a moment ago, we have lots of automation that can be implemented on SAP on every of these layers, tiers, front ends, and components that we were mentioning earlier. But automation has another set of classifications for itself, levels or stages where you could apply these automated tests. And a misunderstanding that was pretty common was to test everything at one area of the system, at a front end, in a screen, or just a browser. Automation should be applied at multiple levels. First, there's unit testing, ABAP code, all the internal coding of SAP can be paired up with some automated code that will test itself. An advantage here is that it's faster, it's more, it goes more coupled with the code that you are trying to check that it's doing the thing that it's supposed to do, or the things that it's supposed to do, which it's generally the first step that is recommended around automations for testing. Then we have all the integration testing, the elements that you need to check that SAP is talking well with other elements, with its own components, with its own functions, and with other systems, that it integrates well, that it communicates, that everything sends back and forth the message as well. You can generate lots of automations in this tier or layer of the solution. And finally, the last is in the front end. As I was mentioning, it is a general, often done approach to try to automate everything at a front end level. As you just heard, there are other tiers where you can work most of the automations, but as well, you can, you can still, and you should still, automate many things in the front end of the SAP platform. And here is some other key components for SAP. One is SAP GUI. When you are working at this level of the front end, your capabilities of automation are limited. There are not that many tools. Wes will give us some insights into what can we do there in a moment. But here's an interesting limitation. SAP, only few tools are available for you to automate at this tier, and it's really important. Some of the things that you cannot test on the unit and integration tier, you should definitely test them here and make sure that some of these front-end elements are working fine, and that is coupled with the web interfaces and all the others, as I mentioned, all the possible devices that you can have tested, how the front end looks, how it behaves, what happens on it. You should definitely try out some automations. And this is just around single functions, components, or actions that you can do. Let's say you want also to test end-to-end, from creating a material until you sent the invoice and dispatched and got a delivery notification. From beginning to end, you can also automate these end-to-end steps. They are aimed more at repeatability, but definitely you can use, and a big advantage that TRICENTIS has around this, as I mentioned, on some of these components, few tools can work around it. Wes, I will let you brag a little around that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Tosca, and as part of the SAP Solex partnership, it's now called ECT, Enterprise Continuous Testing. It does work very well within the GUI, the web, as well as supporting all the recent Fiori versions. SAP continues to evolve Fiori, and we see a lot of changes within the Fiori platform every release. And so that's something we're definitely keeping on top of as part of the partnership. And this is where we see a lot of the effort to automate testing take place using Tosca or ECT, right? So you guys all know SAP. It is a large suite of transactions that allow you to sort of complete business processes. And it is those business processes and the logic embedded within the application that need and require the testing, right? And typically the test results are required at that layer as well by your audit and compliance teams, right? They want to see people logging in, interacting with the system, making sure you can do what you're supposed to do and you're not allowed to do what you're not allowed to do, right? With screenshots and everything else. And so, yeah, Tosca does work really well within this space. And I think beyond the single sort of individualized test cases within SAP, there is this need, and it's where we get a lot, or it's where I'd say we generate a lot of benefit for companies, is when you can start to automate your end-to-end, or what we're starting to dub the value chain processes, right? So this would be something like automating your entire lead to cash cycle, your record to report, your source to settle, whatever these terms are for these core business processes. But stick with the purchasing scenario, right? It's creating the rec, it's converting the rec to a PO, it's processing the approval, it's then updating and sourcing that PO, right? It's the invoice, the goods receipt, the payment, it's all of it, right? With the model-based testing, we can create reusable building blocks within Tosca or ECT that actually facilitate that. And so once you start to create that, now gone are the days where you have to create a PO in company code 1000 and then go create a PO in company code 2000, right? Within the automation and your test data design, you could actually just say, go create this whole end-to-end process for all of these company codes, et cetera. And the system, in a matter of moments, can go do what would otherwise take, time for teams of people to go execute within the application. And so it really does become pretty powerful. You want to talk about performance?
Oh yeah, I was waiting for it. And I was giving it some time because performance as well is a whole slide of itself. It's a whole practice on itself, not because it's mostly what I do, but it is big. And it's really important that you also make sure that you are at least mindful of the performance of your application while using SAP. Often we have transactions processes that tend to be slow, heavy, big jobs and tasks that you need SAP to generate, to import data, things like this that you need to be very aware that you don't impact the business or the user, that the user experience is still acceptable or even enjoyable, why not? So there are elements that you need to take into account when you talk about performance for SAP. This is somewhat universal to all systems, but as I mentioned, there are key components that SAP has, like these big data transfers or big interfaces that need to work well or finish in time. And the first thing that you need to do there is to have baselines, to know what is the experience of a single user, what is the experience of a single process. Having this baseline, you can make it, have it manually or automated. And there's this taboo or this, I would say, misunderstanding in the performance testing world that everything has to be automated and everything has to be a load test, which is the very last thing that I'm going to talk about. Performance testing itself is not the same as load testing. It doesn't equal saying lots of users hitting the system. At the very first step that you need to do is to know what is the baseline of your system. And this is not necessarily through automations. do it through manual tests. You can, of course, use the automations that we mentioned, but as well, nowadays, we have multiple options that we can leverage to figure out this baseline. What is the single user experience, or in general user experiences? I say nowadays because there are several new things coming up that will enable us, but since when I remember starting to play with SAP, I remember lots of transactions that the basis guys would have access to, and they would provide us very interesting metrics, lots of interesting information.
Yep, yeah, I'm here.
The deal here is that you have to have ways to give good interpretations to this. There are many transactions that provide it in a way that, in general, our friends of the basis team are the few ones that can give good interpretations. So here's a matter to make it translatable to the rest of the team or the interested parties. But here comes another element that I would say is a new component that you are getting nowadays. APMs, application performance monitors. There used to be monitors. Nowadays they are management because they can do lots of cool things. But they will hook into your system and will give you lots of information. Some of them, or the biggest ones, will give it somewhat digested and easily exportable into dashboards, into cool charts, into cool graphs that you can see live how your environment, how your system is doing, how fast each component is responding, which is, I think, one of the key elements. It's not like a huge graph just saying the traditional, like the CPU, the RAM. No, you will know more or less each user, what is their experience, each transaction, how fast is it responding, what action is replying. And this will give you as well organic users. You will be able to monitor them. You will be able to tell what is their experience. You may be okay saying that I have a few users in the system. I don't have to do a big test or anything before releasing, so I can just monitor them and keep tuning the system. With this post-productive state, and this is a big taboo that we also will talk about. It's not so wrong to be testing on production. It's not forbidden anymore. It's almost encouraged in some most circumstances. So you can monitor your organic users, real people using your system. You can have beta testers, test objects, to call it in a way, guinea pigs, and measure what is their experience. And with this, you can get good information without even doing any automated load test or any other action. I'm not suggesting you should do that, but you will have lots of information. As well, you can generate synthetic users, automated simulations through different tools that you can have as a single user. I will do this transaction every 30 minutes, every hour, so that you will know live how each action is reporting, how fast is it doing, and if it's taking too long. Some users, and why you want a synthetic, not only to trust the organic, the real flesh and bone users, those get bored, frustrated, and if the system doesn't behave well, they will definitely leave, but some of them may not report you these situations, and you will not find out, because if they don't trigger them, you won't monitor them. So you want some automations, clicking everything here and there, so that you are always aware if the system is down, slow, unusable, and all these around performance. Now we get to the last element: load, capacity, resiliency. These big tests, when you have lots of automations, you have lots of elements and components that you want to test at volume or during prolonged periods of time. Here you definitely need the automations, unless you don't have a big user base and you can just request and get from UAT probably some good load measurements. But in general, load testing is a standard practice. You can do it automated or through organic users, simulate some load, measure it from your monitors, and get a big picture of what is the whole experience in your system with many users, with one user, with no users, which is also a little important element in SAP because at a basal stage, call it in a way, it consumes resources. So you want to know as well about these ones. So as you can see, performance as well is a huge element. Our friends at TRICENTIS as well, the company Neos now is part of the TRICENTIS family, and they bring up the NeoLoad load testing tool. As the name says, it's thought of load testing. Gives you lots of capabilities, and as I was mentioning, NeoLoad is one of the few tools in the market that will give you the capability of automating in the GUI front end for SAP. Not many, just like I think I can count them with one hand. Not many tools will give you that capability. NeoLoad is one of them, and it also integrates really well with the rest of the front ends and possible interactions that you may have with SAP. And well, I could keep talking the whole hour just about performance, but moving on a little bit and giving more time for more comments. Why don't you give us some details around the compliance and security, regulatory, all the other components that we have around QA?
Yeah, absolutely. I think compliance, regulatory, and security are areas that are commonly overlooked, right? I think, these large implementations get all the way through, and then all of a sudden at the end, you've got this mad rush to try and sort out your compliance and regulatory requirements as well as, your security. And I think to talk security first, it's now very multi-layered, right? As we talk about these, SaaS offerings integrated to your cloud, which also ties into your on-prem, right? You have multiple layers of security across the landscape as well as your role-based access control within the individual applications. And SAP has, a rather robust security sort of system within itself. And it's something that you definitely need to test, and you have to test both positive and negative. And so, I think what you end up having here in terms of security is a bit of some manual testing to sort of confirm some of this stuff is working. And then once you get some of this stuff working, right, you then have you really then have the capability to sort of automate or embed that security testing in with your regular routine regression testing, et cetera. Right, so you have the right roles testing the right processes as well as having negative testing built in as well, right? Looking for things to fail and that failure actually being listed as a success. And all this is for compliance and regulatory requirements, right? You have to produce results for your compliance teams that show you've done all this, that the system is secure, that everything's locked up and tidy. And so, again, an area that's commonly sort of pushed to the end of a project, but definitely something where, the tooling and the correct mindset or the right approach to proactively plan for this can actually save you time versus, being a time suck at the end. So, Leandro, you want to talk about chaos in the user experience?
Yeah, many other areas of enabling quality on your SAP environments. Just want to give a few, go back a little bit to the security part. And yes, as you mentioned, it's overlooked at times, where SAP is very robust in terms of security, but there are other functional security things that are often overlooked, and probably often this chaos, a little segue to what we're going to talk in a moment, when you require to figure out what group to role this user, if they have the access needed, just copying the roles and just mimicking those elements, you can test that when you assign a role, that you assign a user certain permissions that they will be able to access or not, that they should not be. So it's huge. Many people just think that it's not hackable, but around security, you can test lots of things. And talking about the chaos that is the security as well, chaos is a new component in around quality that goes more around stability or resilience of your systems. Was introduced, I believe, by Netflix, where they created this chaos monkey that was turning off services, servers, processes randomly, variably. And this is important to make sure that your SAP environment is ready for unexpected circumstances and the vicissitudes of life that we can always, and we often face. If a server can die, it will die eventually, and you don't want to be unprepared to those moments. So chaos engineering, chaos testing will help you to be sure to that you will survive those chaotic events. And another component as well is user experience. As I was mentioning earlier, it is incredibly important and something that mostly you won't be able to get away without manual testing, because it's a real user. The experience they need to report, if it flows, if it feels well. And nowadays it's even more important that you keep up with it. The old GUI platform used to be very, to call it in a way, squared, was very straightforward, and had not that many areas to miss it. Even some may say that it was not so usable either way, but that could be something that could have been applied. And I was trying to get a segue into the new front ends, especially with Fiori, which all the squares flow, all the fields are feel a little bit more movable to me, more dynamic. And you want that dynamism is usable, that is enjoyable, that your users, employees, customers, whoever has to access your SAP platform enjoys it, can flow through it. That is not a hassle to be working with it, or that the bottom has a bar that will block your visibility, or a button that you need to click is totally outside of the zoom of your screen. Silly little things that can make your system complicated to use. It's very important that you dedicate some thought, some brain time to making sure that your users enjoy flow and, to call it in a way, can't wait to use your system, similar to how you cannot wait to use the Netflix system and application, right? And this is a little segue into some other things, some of the future things that are already here or that are coming to SAP. Why don't you give us some outlook of what is coming on this elements?
Yeah, for sure. And I think what's cool is, like you said, this is a tool that's already here, right? So this is what we call Live Compare, or if you ask your Solex partner, what is called CIA, right? Change Impact Analysis. And I think, you know, when we talk about the future of what is coming, right? It's using tools to increase the individual capabilities of our project team members, right? And so, as you mentioned, Leandro, one of the old paradigms, the old ways of thinking was, we don't necessarily know exactly what we need to test, so let's just test everything. Every time we change something, let's just test everything, right? And while that is seemingly the best decision that can be made at the time, it is not, you know, where we have to stay forever. And so what we've done is develop a tool where, you know, you essentially pass your changes for your ABAP-based system into this tool, and it's going to go through and, you know, compare the usage of your system to really automatically generate a risk profile, right? So now all of a sudden we're talking about risk-based testing. We know what we're changing, right, because we're changing it, but what we don't know is how those changes are used in the system and the risk associated with that. And that's what this tool creates, is it creates this way to sort of visualize and tell you, here's your most at risk, right? And so that's pretty powerful stuff, right, to know that these changes are impacting all these very important things. And then what the tool does as part of the integration with ECT or with Tosca is it can then, based on the technical components that are changing, actually start to draw correlations between the test scripts that you do and you don't have. So now we can see this concept of risk-based testing, right, being very pertinent. It has a really substantial effect in terms of decreasing the scope of your testing, right? We no longer have to test everything, right? As well as going one step further and telling you where you don't have test coverage, i.e. you have objects that are changing and the system is unable to recognize that you have any testing, test scripts, cases, modules, etc., that contain the technical components that are changing in the SAP system. Right, so we're using AI now to sort of empower the teams to make really, effective decisions when it comes to what needs to be tested, how certain are we of that coverage, right, which is all around building confidence that, yes, these things should go into our production system and they all should work well, right?
Right, absolutely. It's super important. Enables for you to optimize your resources in terms of quality, because you won't be, as you very well said, losing time on an area that might not need that. Will let you know, hey, this other area is important and you are not paying enough attention to it. Definitely, it helps you to optimize. Moving on as well, Fury done lots of segues during this presentation of what is coming, what is here, and what is going to happen, and the evolution, as you can see here on the screen, how it has been changing and how everything is trying to move as much as possible into this Fiori. Lots of front ends, lots of platforms, lots of elements where you can play with, enable you to play with SAP, not only in the UIs, in the front ends and the user interfaces, but as well how to interact with many other platforms. As I mentioned, there are multiple services being generated, which all of them will encourage the open communication to have some sort of autonomy on your SAP environment, on all the components and all the front ends that depend on it, interconnected single elements that work synergically, to call it in a way, to call a fancy word, but are not completely dependent, that you can work with them, without them, interconnect them, leave them, have some sort of decentralized decision making, and give all these decision-making capability to leadership, to users as well when they need all this information. And all this evolution is coming and will keep coming. There's a Fiori platform for you to see or watch on your Tesla car while you are hopefully not. And as I said, I have seen it in refrigerators, and who knows where else. And the capabilities are limited. Internet of Things. Lots of things are coming to SAP through these powerful UIs that especially enables for you on as many platforms, and APIs that are coming up that enable you to connect your SAP solution to many other things. So many things are coming. It keeps, as was said, many of these are already here, but they will keep mutating. They will keep evolving, giving you many more capabilities. And
now, I was going to chime in, Andrew, and just say, right?
Yeah, go on.
in our strive to deliver a simplified user experience, we inherently create complexity on the back end, right? So that's what I like about this slide, right? I used to just have the Win GUI, right? But now I have the Win GUI plus Fiori. And now that I have Fiori apps, people want to log into those Fiori apps from their mobile devices, right? So now all of a sudden I have multiple layers of complexity that I'm building, and the user experience is improving. It's simpler, it's better, it's faster, it's everything we want, right? But there is an inherent complexity with driving that simplicity. And as part of that, you need a mindset, thought leadership that can cope with and plan and effectively manage, as well as a tool set that can, the same thing, cope with and deal with testing all of the different platforms and, supporting the security and compliance and manual testing and performance testing and everything else. So.
Absolutely. It's incredibly important, and how it is evolving, how it is, the capabilities that it is giving. We need to expand our minds and understand them. Again, as I was saying, from the silly small example of user experience, usability, buttons being available, usable, thumbable, because it's kind of important nowadays, until little details. Where are we going to see these platforms? Who is going to be aware of them? And for everyone to have them in mind and to keep thinking around the QA for these elements. Because not only this, not only on the front end, on the interconnectivity side, we have changes. Wes, we also have a growing cloud ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to describe it, right? So the old paradigm of ECC was running Oracle databases in your on-prem data center, right? And now we have the evolution of HANA database system, right? So now we have the apps running on HANA. And that has evolved into cloud offerings directly from SAP, right? SuccessFactors, Concur, and Ariba form what SAP calls the spend, what do they call it? Total spend management, something like that, as well as Hybris for all of your customer management. And so now you're in a scenario where you probably have an on-prem data center still because you're on your migration out of that, right? But that's going to take, or has been taking, a year or two, right? A couple of years depending on your size, right? Your SAP system could already be in your private cloud. But if you're using things like Ariba, Concur, SuccessFactors, these are subscription-based. These are SaaS offerings. These are hosted by SAP, right? And so now all of a sudden you have integrations from their cloud to your cloud. It would be no different for something like potentially Salesforce, ServiceNow, and some of the other big commercial off-the-shelf applications like Workday and all the other ones, right? And so you, again, I'm going to just kind of say the similar thing. It all creates complexity, right? And you need a mindset and a tool set, to sort of cope with that complexity. I think if we move on. Oh, go ahead.
No. I was going to add up a little bit, because this also adds up a little tier or layer that some organizations are not used to have on the mindset, from the tiny difference of what is SaaS, software as a service, PaaS, process service, infrastructure as a service, all the different mixes that you can have on that SAP enables you, is incredibly important that it's also understood how to apply quality, how to think around it, and who knows, and most probably more mixes will come around this, and our organizations need to be prepared, right? And especially because all these gives as well more complexity in the, in the next layer, in the interconnectivity, right?
Yep.
Wes?
Yeah, and that's what I was looking ahead to, is just the example of complexity we have here, right? This is a real use case from McKesson, which is a large medical provider in the U.S. Starting in the sort of middle left side, right, we have a Salesforce system. That is a SaaS offering. That is not your cloud. That is integrated in. We can see that is integrated in to a custom app, right, as well as the CRM system, right? So already in the first two boxes, we probably have 3 integrations running on different technologies, different connectors coming in and out of different clouds, right? All the way into your core SAP system, which, you know, hopefully is within your on-prem or in your Azure VPC, right? And then continuing on, right? Order delivery is handled by another set of services and applications, procure to pay. We have Ariba, custom, as well as integrations with the SAP systems. Fieldglass could be in there for service spend management and sort of dealing with that. And now all of a sudden we're pumping all that data out into a reporting and analytics layer, right? So how do we confirm that all the extraction and data replication and virtualization is all working, that the numbers all the way from Salesforce match all the way in our reporting and analytics layers, right? The complexity continues when you talk about moving into your distribution centers. Now you're going to have systems like Manhattan or potentially Infor systems running, just as a couple of examples for physical distribution or fulfillment center type activities, right? We're pick, packing, and shipping. We're integrated with FedEx to send the packages to the customers, right? Around security, you know, you need a way to manage sort of things like firefighter roles, which is where GRC comes in, as well as all sorts of other stuff, right? You're going to probably have a little RPA running all over the place, as well as other integration components like MuleSoft, if you have a CI/CD pipeline, etc. So, you know, just trying to paint a real-life example of the complexity, right? In this example, there's probably 4 or 5 clouds. There's probably at least 1 on-prem data center, and there's probably a bunch of different technologies stringing all this stuff together, right? When we talk about testing, we have to consider what I dubbed the value chain early on, which is all the way from Salesforce all the way through reporting, right? And we can see a very visual example of what that entails. And so, you know, the approach is first to realize the complexity and then not be overwhelmed by it, but to start small. You know, we see customers have a lot of success if you start in small specific areas. Maybe you start with your SAP and your Vistex, which is managing your tax, right? And you try and automate some of your testing around procure to pay, which would then as a next logical step involve your Ariba system, right? Then maybe it expands into the reporting and analytics layer so that you can now see your accounts receivable, accounts payable, your open invoice balance, etc., right? And so again, start small and build is kind of the recommendation, not to be overwhelmed by some of this. Leandro,
Yeah,
you want to make any
absolutely.
comments? Go ahead.
Yeah, and yeah, I was just about to take over and start saying some things. And to give, this is a current state. This is what is already. And for the audience, just be ready, beware. This is just gonna get more funky, more interconnected. We will get more capabilities as time goes by. New technologies arise. So beware, be prepared, and I would say this is a medium, low complex diagram. We of course have seen way worse. So beware and be ready. Other elements, and moving on, spinning up here a little bit, we have this other modern buzzword that is coming often: continuous integration, continuous elements. SAP traditionally has not been in its nature so much viable for continuous integration, but SAP is working on the GCTS offering. They are trying different things, the Project Piper. They're trying to integrate it with Git so that we can start to think around it, try to see how can we enable continuous SAP, to call it in a way. But there's more to come. It's not there yet. It's a work in progress. Beware and be ready, because this is where all the world is going to and where we will be working on. Another little element that is coming up and starting to grow a little bit, not so much taken over by SAP, is AI. Wes, why don't you give us a little bit of...
Yeah, for sure. So things like conversational bots within SAP. I mean, you know, artificial intelligence and machine learning are probably the 2 hottest buzzwords still, and we're probably all sick of hearing it. But we're now at the point where we're actually seeing meaningful implementations of those two sort of tools and technologies. And within the SAP space is no different. I think as TRICENTIS, we are, pursuing AI-driven solutions as well. We saw a little bit where we use some machine learning as part of the CIA or Live Compare tool. And one of our newer tools that's coming out is what we call Vision AI. And Vision AI has a really cool thing where, you using machine learning and reinforcement training, you really go through a process of looking at screenshots or training against screenshots of your various applications. And the machine learning there will start to learn the apps, right? So it'll start to then learn how to interact so that when you create automation and your automation breaks, as an example, we actually can start to enable what we call self-healing, because the machine learning still sees that field, but say that field has moved, or say it still has the same input values, but it was renamed, right? Simple things that have changed in the UI that would cause traditional automation to immediately fail. Through tools like Vision AI, we can start to self-heal and learn from those mistakes, learn from those changes, so that, instead of running your automation and everything fails, we can proactively run something like Vision AI, and it would come and tell you, hey, I made all of these changes. I couldn't figure these couple out, right? And then you can figure out, do I go and proofread and make sure that was all good, or, you know what I mean? You sort of figure out what to do with it, but it's very powerful, because I think, one of the common sort of pains with automation is a project would go through and they would create all the automation and they would get near 100% success rates, right? They would be able to run all their automation, et cetera. 6 months later, or maybe 3 months later, it's 95%. 3 months after that, it's 80%. A year later, it's 60%. 2 years down the road, only 40% of that automation still works, right? Because, again, the systems are changing. SAP is changing the applications, right? If you're not in there constantly, right, it's going to sort of get away from you, right? And to me, that's a bit of a time suck, and that's where we can use a set of tools to start to, like I said, increase the individual capabilities of our teams, right? I would much rather have a team come in the morning and review a result set that said, hey, a bunch of this stuff changed. Here are those changes. We think, or the application saying, we think it's this, and we tested it like this, and it works, right? And so now your team, again, is doing higher level things. They're confirming that it's working. Now they're not in there figuring out why it's not working, right? And so, yeah, pretty powerful stuff. Leandro?
Yeah, lots of things coming, lots of uncertainties, and well, exciting things as well. But to keep scaring and getting to the interesting part, and to leave some time for some questions, let's go into the recommendations. What do we would say would be good for you to implement in terms of SAP enabling quality? In general, the first recommendation would be to get or procure an adequate coverage for the QA areas. As I mentioned, there are different layers of QA that you can implement on your systems, and focus on doing adequate QA efforts, that you are not probably wasting too much time on an automation or on a manual test, or thinking around QA, as was said earlier, on an area that doesn't have much impact, that will not be helping you or providing the best results. Another recommendation that is huge lately, this has been huge to break, and not so much lately, but it has been critical, and that has been a roadblock for many organizations, and they don't even know about it, are the silos. The members of your teams isolated. Like, here are the ABAP developers in their aisle of the office. Here we have the testers. Here we have the UAT team. Here is management. Everyone separated and passing everything in sealed boxes and without much communication, without much. We need to work around that. For good QA, modern practices, it's super important that you bring down those silos, that let people openly communicate, interact from day one. You want and a little bit egotistical thought here, but will give you lots of benefit. Have the QA person involved and working from day one of your implementation, from day one of the fix, the change, all during the time of whatever effort you're doing around SAP. And if with this you find that you have to do automations, a big recommendation is to stick to the automation pyramid. This is a concept not very well known by many organizations as well. I'll give you some tips around it. But let's go first into manual testing, which has its own recommendations for you to, as I was saying, not to waste efforts. Manual testing should be left only for the things that you cannot automate. It is not to say for you to try to automate everything or to try to automate everything on the front end, but as I was saying earlier, user experience, focus on those type of manual tests that buttons are flowing well, that they quote-unquote feel right, things around the GUI, the front end, do some exploratory testing, understandability, which sounds like a fancy word, but that the user flows through it. You should not require to get a manual to understand most applications. Nowadays, with mobile applications, you just download them, start using them, and you understand them. You flow through them. You don't need a complex manual. You don't need an instructive to know how to start to use the application. That's part of what manual testing should be bringing up. Focus on those areas. Don't try to do manual, I don't know, negative testing, field testing that you can capture things, that the emoji cannot be typed here. Don't waste resource and efforts there. And to manage all this, as we were mentioning earlier, TRICENTIS provides QTest, a very good platform to manage all the results, all the test cases, all the steps, the people that will be manually executing these steps, and that can give the information in a centralized way from any location, anywhere that they are, and that management can also look at the results, take decisions based on that. But super important, manual testing won't disappear. It will be something that definitely and simply I don't believe machines will ever be able to do. Let human beings do it, but think about it. Give it some thought and make it be the most impactful. And speaking of things that do have to be automated, I was mentioning earlier, stick to the automation pyramid. This is something that many organizations still fall into the completely the opposite approach. They don't have a pyramid. It's called that they have a ice cream cone. The thick layer is on top and the thin layer is at the bottom. It should be at the top very, very little. Let me describe it from bottom to top. Unit testing, code testing, your ABAP code, all those integrations, you should have the most number of automated processes at the unit testing level. Why these coverages? Why? Because it's the easiest, it's the fastest, is the most straightforward approach that you can do, as long as you have thought about it in advance, as I mentioned earlier. A little bit like test-driven development. When you create some new code, new functions, customizations, think of what tests you need to do. And this is why I was saying bring down the silo, talk to your QA representative, friend, fellow person, and tell them we're going to do these customizations. What should we be thinking about? What should we test about? So that when we start to create the code, we are already aware of it. And then the next layer is the integrations. This integration should also be wide, the automations for integration that you can have, but still a little bit less than unit testing. Lots of them, but not so many. It's important. It's very easy as well to automate, to think and test what would be the best approach here. And usually at the integration layer, they are still canned up fast to be generated, maintained, automated, verified, and they are really, really quick to report the results. On these, for the next layers, component and integration, and when you have UI and API, you can leverage these unit tests, automated unit tests, and these service tests that you generated above. So use them, leverage them. You can use them for many other testing processes. For this, it is really important, what I was saying, the silos. Bring them down. Talk with your developers. Have good relationships with them, and especially enable them to create the automations. That's another taboo that you need to bring down. Don't let the developers be an isolated entity. Worst case, don't let them be the enemy. This fight in between testers and developers should not be happening anymore. Make sure that you have good communication. If you can, make them switch positions at times, and make sure that you assure that your developers can create those automations at the same time with the code. And last but not least, automate front-end and end-to-end only the little elements that you could not do below at the code level, at the integration level, at the service level. Most organizations try to automate the most possible at the front-end level, which is not the best approach. Those automations take lots of time. They are quite slow. They are a little bit complex to maintain. You need a tester generally because it's just with a tool that the tester can use. Again, I'm not saying you should not do them, but be precise, be mindful of what is the impact, of what things are you going to test, where you can test them before, earlier, easier, faster, and what you cannot. Definitely do your end-to-end front-end automations to test what you could not test together in the front end. Don't be doing negative tests in the front end. Don't be doing some sort of test that is more efficient to do them on a different layer. And last, and more around the performance testing that I was mentioning earlier, don't focus solely on load testing. Load testing is not all there is on performance testing. You need mostly to know what is the performance of your solution. Monitor the responses, especially on custom code, which is on SAP, what is more prone to having performance issues. As I was mentioning earlier, you may have automations for other components that were done by the rest of the teams. You can leverage those, bring them into your load performance testing tools, performance monitoring tools, or just trigger them and monitor. That's super important. You must do all that way before you load testing. Load test only after you did everything else, until you use the other automations, until you did some manual tests, until you gather the metrics, until you have all those other automations that you can leverage for a load test. Don't jump ahead right into trying to do a load test. I always give this silly example. If you don't test each part of your Formula One racing car separately, don't try to figure out in the race by racing the car. If the tires are flat, measure them separated, make sure that they are balanced, aligned, and then you can integrate them with the car and then race it. Don't dare to race your SAP system before trying all the pieces separately. And for everything else, make sure that you always monitor. Make sure that you are always on top of the performance measurements without having the need of automations. There are many ways that you can be aware of your system, again with cars, that you can have your dashboard in the car to know if you have oil, if the tires are flat, if you need to do service, how many kilometers or miles your car has moved. All that should be available by default, and you should be paying attention to it in general. But not to stop too long on performance, Wes, what else around other areas for QA?
Yeah, for sure. You know, we've hit a little bit of these, so I'll kind of breeze back through them. But, you know, in provisioning your users, right, I think I always encourage people to sort of challenge what
Wes, I think we lost you. I'm sorry, we'll have to stop. Leandro, could you hear Wes?
Yeah, in the
So
test,
a way to increase the capability of your team, right, is to sort of reimagine.
Wes, can you hear us?
And that just to create
it's
the
lagging,
purchase.
it's catching up now. Okay, do you want to talk now?
Hold on, what happened?
I think we lost you for a while.
Yeah, it went quiet for a while, and then
right.
it just suddenly you were speaking at a really fast speed because it was catching up with itself. And if you want to start the slide again. Just a clear break.
Cool. Well, we made it pretty far, guys. So,
Okay.
All right, ready? Starting now. Yep. All right, so starting now, security and compliance. So I think I talked a little bit about this, but I think to...
Sorry, you starting now went straight in. I need a clean break. So I know it sounds petty, but I need at least a second or two, literally. Okay. So if you just do it, then silence and then in. Thanks.
All right, here we go. Talking security and compliance, I've beat this up a little bit today already. I want to give kind of an example of how we can use the automation to increase the capability of our team, right? So a reimagining of sort of our user provisioning and role-based testing. Traditionally, you would write a test script and assign a user to it. User number one, test user number one can create a PO. Then we, as part of that same test script, write the PO, right? The paradigm can now shift to where I can create the modules to create the PO, and I can actually pass in the user as a parameter. So now what I can do is I can actually positive and negative test the ability of my specific user profiles to test specific capabilities, and I can do that en masse within one click, right? So again, I have a module that says go create a PO, and I use the automation to say, okay, now I want you to do that for all 10 of these user profiles, right? And one could be a financial analyst who shouldn't create it. One can be a purchaser who can create it, right? And you get all of those results. That same sort of concept exists for a lot of the features and functions that you're going to try and test, right? All this is in support of audit and compliance. The sooner we start to consider audit and compliance in our project, the less likely we are going to have delays in our go live because we haven't been involving those folks, right? They are servicing the regulatory requirements. They are the gatekeepers of that. And so, again, as part of a project, we are building to the requirements. And so we have to make sure that we're including this stuff. And I think all of this can really be accelerated if we start to think about testing differently, right? No one really likes to test. I admittedly have spent weeks, if not months of my life just testing SAP applications, and it is definitely needed, but it is an area that I always thought there could be better solutions or ways to increase my capabilities to help me do it better, right? And so it's culture. Leandro, anything to add?
Yeah, in general, security and compliance, it's very important to have it on your testing culture. It's an element that needs to be paid attention, and most of it, we have some set of rules, lists of what to test for, what you cannot dismiss it. But moving on a little bit, we mentioned the cloud elements. Why don't you give us some quick info on it?
Yeah, for sure. Yep. I mean, to keep moving quick, right? Cloud components all need testing, right? The cloud offers resiliency. It offers better, more modern ways to do that, but it comes with its own complexity, right? I think, topics like elasticity, as well as all of your SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS solutions, right? It's a complex mix of things that are going on, and all of those components need to be tested in some way, all the way back to what Leandro said. Some things can be unit tested, right? Some things have to be integration testing. In some cases, we need to test end-to-end business flows. Can this application create something that is sent to that application where another set of users do something with it, which then sends it all the way back to the source system, right, where it is finalized? I think there's a lot of complexity in here, and I think that's what we're trying to harp on. And then just to integrations, right? connectivity, delays, performance, lots of tools in the cloud to do these things in a very modern way. But again, that doesn't negate the need for testing. So moving on.
Yeah, lots of extra complexities that the cloud will bring on and that we need to test and be aware of some of those changes. And as Wes and I mentioned, the SaaS, PaaS, IaaS differences will make your testing strategy very different on what you have to pay attention. And many other things that we could keep talking about, but looking at our watches, I think it's time for now. We can keep talking. Of course, Wes and I are very enthusiastic about the topic. We can keep talking hours and hours, but we need to give some time now for some Q&A and
Okay. Let me see what questions have come in. Okay. So why is QA any different in SAP from any other systems or platforms?
if I might jump on that one, SAP, as we mentioned earlier, has some key and different components. On one, it's widespread. Many organizations have it. It's very powerful. It's huge. And I doubt that have the size and complexity that SAP has grown into. But as well, it has some other characteristics, the way that it works, HANA, the different database, the components, the transports, SAP on itself, animal from many other applications. And accordingly, QA has to be a little bit different than how you approach other applications. And to start off with small differences, like I was mentioning, HANA is one key difference for the environment, and other which is on itself a peculiar GUI, different from other. You need specialized elements to be able to automate it. You need knowledge to test it. You need understanding, and many other elements. That's what I would say. SAP QA is very different from some others.
Okay, thanks for that, Leandro. Another question here. Why now? Why are we talking about test automation? Who wants that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. I think the answer is sort of two-part as I see it. One, the majority of these large companies, right, have all adopted some form of an agile methodology, right? And so, the concept of testing, continuous testing, integration testing is becoming more baked into the culture. So there's less resistance to change and enhancement within the testing space, right? So I think the human side of it, that is first. And, I recently, before I joined TRICENTIS, actually implemented Tosca, which is where I learned about it. And I'll never forget the demos that I saw. I had not realized, coming from the days of HPQC and LoadRunner, et cetera, that the capabilities of these tools to interact with the SAP systems and the integration layer and everything had honestly come as far as they have. And so I think, we're now at this perfect position where we are talking more about testing and how to do testing and really push the bounds of what is possible. And we see a tool set that is actually pushing the boundaries of what is possible as well. And so, it's marrying up. It's this crossing of these two things that is really, making it a lot better off now than it was, say, a couple of years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, very thorough. Thank you. Looks like we've got another one here. Where would you recommend to start with QA on SAP?
Well, I think I'm going to take a shot on that one because right away it made me jump at it. I think, and I mentioned it on the presentation, the very first step that I would recommend is to bring down those silos and to enable this communication in between your QA people, your devs, management, everyone to be on the same page, on the same meetings, and if possible in the same room. Not that we can do that much still in these days of COVID, but soon we will be able, or at least start a communication early, start putting together key people that can give some ideas, some coverage, and give all this important input from the beginning. Bring down the silos and start early. I would say that those are the key elements and recommendations I could give.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for your questions. I'm just conscious of time, so if anyone has any additional questions or comments about any of the discussion in today's webinar, please get in touch with the presenters. Their details are on screen right now, or reach out to me and I will make sure your question is answered. My contact details are included within an email which will follow once the webinar ends. I'd like to close by thanking our presenters for sharing their time and wealth of expertise today. Leandro, Wes, it's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. Always a joy.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Wes. And again, sincere thanks to our partner TRICENTIS to mention you for jointly collaborating with us. And not forgetting an extended thanks to you, our audience, for joining us. Just a heads up, you can save your seat at one of our upcoming webinars by visiting our website qualitestgroup.com/insights/webinars. It leaves me now to say goodbye. So until next time, when we look forward to you joining us again, all the best and goodbye. Goodbye, everyone.